spooky friends. It's hard to believe that a small stretch of land on the East River could be such a beautiful and picturesque place where rent is $2,000 for a small one-bedroom apartment, and the some 14,000 people that live on that island are aware of its dark history, but live there nonetheless. Also commonly believe that the island is still haunted from over a century ago, full of mysteries that have gone unanswered for decades. I'm talking about Roosevelt Island. Roosevelt Island was home to a smallpox hospital, which was more like an overcrowded hospice, an insane asylum, which I hate that term, known for its abysmal treatment of its patients, as well as a prison that more so just acted as cheap labor for the island, and a creepy lighthouse that was actually a project from an escaped asylum patient. While there are many haunted places in New York City, none are as abysmal and terrifying as Roosevelt Island. So where did it all begin? The island was initially called Minnehaha by the Lenape, the Delaware Indians at the time. During the 18th century, they were pushed out of their homeland, obviously by white Europeans. Their situation was exacerbated by intertribal conflict. Captain John Manning took the island from the Lenape and after they fought the Dutch. It made it easier for the Americans to just plow through them because they couldn't fight back. Most Lenape now live in Oklahoma, with some communities living in Wisconsin and some living in Ontario. The translation of Lenape is genuine, kind, and true. Lenape would then mean original person. They belong to the Algonquin sect, so they may have spoke Algonquin, though I wasn't sure I could 100% corroborate that. If anyone has any suggestions, please put it in the comments. So it's safe to say that this is stolen land yet again, and we're going to go ahead and put an asylum, a prison, and a smallpox hospital on top of it. What could possibly go wrong there? It then repeatedly changed names back and forth for many years, renamed to Roosevelt Island for President Roosevelt. Confusing, I know. Also known as Welfare Island. So you can imagine exactly how people thought about being sent there and about the people that resided there and died there. Let's talk about the Renwick Smallpox Hospital. Originally opened in 1856, Renwick was New York's answer to the smallpox epidemic. The alleged spirits still suffer inside. And this is one of the most notorious locales for paranormal activity on Roosevelt Island. The reason? The deaths. Some of the country's most deathly ill patients were confined in this walls. Also keep in mind that if you were found out to have smallpox, you were escorted by police to this island. There was no getting out. Recovery from smallpox was challenging, with a 70% survival rate, which isn't too bad. However, the main reason for most of these deaths is the intense spreadability of smallpox and the lack of knowing exactly how to treat it during this time in history. Yes, a vaccine did come out, however, it was not accessible to everybody right away, and smallpox was a pandemic of catastrophic proportions. These are the victims of a brutal plague. Although there was a vaccine available in later years, many who emigrated from other places to America were unable to get the vaccine and thus were sent to this island to die. And once inside, smallpox sufferers had to wait days or weeks to receive any type of treatment, writhing in agony as their bodies tried to fight. Their total number was approximately 7,000 patients per year, and in total 30,000 deaths in its less than 20 years of occupation. Guests and residents of the island report seeing random lights and hearing strange noises coming from the abandoned hospital. It's no wonder with the type of death that happened and the type of neglect that went on in this place. I can't imagine that a spirit would just easily pass on having lived through such agony. Coping with the amount of deaths and also the disposal of bodies in great heaps and piles, burned and disposed of in the East River. Interestingly, this hospital was built by prison labor. A chain gang was set up that quarried granite stone that created the buildings. Smallpox was thought to have killed at least 300 million people. And just a little bit about smallpox, it's a horrible disease that creates little pustules all over the body. I'm going to show one image and that one image only. So before luxury high-rise buildings were built here, an area known as the Octagon, due to its special shape, was home to the New York City Lunatic Asylum from 1841 until 1894. Charles Dickens once visited the building that had the asylum, and he had this to say. Everything had a lounging, listless madhouse air, which was very painful. The New York City Lunatic Asylum housed more than 1,700 patients with mistreatment so abysmal, living conditions so horrible. This 1.5-acre piece of land is home to so much pain. Roughly 30 to 40 patients at any time were suicidal, and they required intensive therapies, which they were not getting. Most patients sent here were considered friendless and poor, which meant that they were not going to receive treatment in a way that they should and a way that's dignified. They had no one but the state to look after them, and I'm sure you can imagine how well they're going to be treated by the state. Shade. As more people were packed into this asylum during this time, you can imagine that over time conditions became more and more abysmal. For breakfast, the inmates would only be served coffee and bread, while supper was just simply bread, butter, and tea, with the occasional serving of beef soup thrown into the mix, which was less than a few times a week. I actually remember in, I think it was grade 9 or 10, I wrote an expose in history class based on a woman named Nellie Bly, who voluntarily admitted herself into the asylum just so that she could report on the treatment of people there, and what she had to say will blow your mind. Once inside, she reported on the inhuman treatment of patients here. Nellie proclaimed that some of the inmates that were in the asylum were not actually insane at all. They were just women who couldn't speak English and were deemed insane because nobody could understand them. No one deserved this type of treatment, regardless of where they came from and what they suffered from. Many patients had severe rashes, lesions, and were beaten by staff, not to mention verbally abused. Now, keep in mind, this was written in 1887, and it was entitled 10 Days in a Madhouse. The insane asylum on Blackwells Island is a human rat trap. Bly wrote, "It's easy to get in, but once there, it is impossible to get out." Her report on her stay in the women's wing here changed the way that Americans looked at mental health care forever. Since its closure, people who have visited the island have noticed a really bad sense. They say that there's a great suffering and sorrow in the air, and of course, strange noises and bumps in the night. One current resident of the Octagon said, "If you care about ghost stories, then don't live here." The building was abandoned in 1955 until the year 2000, when it was purchased by a construction company, and they started building more luxury apartments, although some of it is being preserved. Blackwell Penitentiary, erected in 1832, was one of the earlier structures on Roosevelt Island, and remains one of the most disturbing. It housed nearly 1,000 inmates who were sent to Blackwell as part of a labor program. People say that they can still hear the inmates working inside of the penitentiary. The penitentiary, or the workhouse as it was known, housed up to 220 prisoners. They referred to them as workers, who were just merely petty violators. There have been numerous sightings of inmates and strange goings-on. In 1858, the waterway between Bronx and Queens earned a particularly terrifying nickname, Hell's Gate. The passage between these two areas was so dark that ships would run aground mysteriously in the middle of the night, and the only light that they could see was the ominous glow from the asylum. Speaking of the asylum, inmate John McCarthy escaped. He believed that at any moment the British were going to come and take Roosevelt Island, and that in 1872 it was just not on the radar of the Americans to fight off the British. So he took it upon himself to fortify the island by creating a lighthouse, just in case the British decided to launch an attack, he could see them coming. He took it upon himself to build a wall out of clay from the island, to fortify the island just in case the British wanted to start an attack. And he actually carved something into the rocks which gives tourists the heebie-jeebies, and it states, "This is the work was done by John McCarthy, who built the lighthouse from the bottom to the top. All ye who do pass may by pray for his soul when he dies." God rest your soul, John. In the early 1800s, immigration to New York City became so prevalent because of its rapid industrialization. Unfortunately, with thousands being added to the workforce, there was also those who were indignant and sane, who were left without jobs and forced to be cared for by the city, which you can guess at where they wanted to put them. As a result, New York had to erect more asylums, and Roosevelt was the #1 place to do so because it was so isolated from everywhere else. But this caused a massive overflow. Custodial and food staff were spread paper thin, One asylum commissioner said that Blackwell's patients were in a miserable refuge for their trial, undeserving of the name asylum in the enlightened days. What's insane to me is that the pain on this island was so palpable in this time, and then the city kind of just let it go until year 2000, and then they just decided to build these luxury high-rise condos on top of death and despair. These people were malnourished, uncared for, horribly abused, and their deaths mean nothing now. Of course, many people have witnessed some unexpected things on this island, such as noises or lights, or just really eerie feelings. But what would you expect with so much death and chaos on this place? Roosevelt Island is full of pain and chaos. It's no wonder that these spirits cannot rest. And now they're being disturbed again. And now rich people are building their condos on top of them. I hope we learn from this, because we need to do better. So what are your thoughts? Have you been to Roosevelt Island? Is it truly as haunted as they say? And how do you feel about these condos being built on top of all this chaos? I'd love to know what you think. Put your comments in the comment section down below. I love reading them, as you know. Also, be sure to like and subscribe if you're not already. I put out new videos on Wednesdays, and I look forward to seeing you again.